All right, we're going to go back to our committee reports, and we're going to go to law and licensing.
Okay.
Chair Bolter.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I hope you guys had a chance to read this. I'm not going to go over a whole lot of it. The policies and procedures update, staff member Angie Stallings and Allison Nicholson provided us with updates on policies and different things that they're going to be updating. And there's also they're going to also create a policy on how to write new policies. So that was just an information piece. On R277-493, Kindergarten Supplemental Enrichment Program, we talked about amendments to R277-493 to clarify the reapplication process. And there was some concern about a portion in that rule, lines 26 to 28, how it could create a roadblock. But that's in there in case we have more applicants than we do allocated money, and we don't have that happening, so we've got enough money to continue with this. So the committee action was that Member Belknap moved that the Law and Licensing Committee approve amendments to R277-493 Draft 1 on first reading with a positive recommendation to the board, and the motion passed unanimously. The motion for the board is that the Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve the amendments to R277-493, Draft 1 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the board is to approve the amendments to R277-493, Draft 1 on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Voting is unanimous.
Okay, R277-801, this is services for students who are deaf, hard of hearing, blind, visually impaired, and deafblind. This came out of an Eliminating Barriers Task Force, and Superintendent Coleman explained that the largest school districts that have more than 3% of the students, they have to provide their own services. They can contract with USDB, but they are charged for it, and USDB would like to actually offer those services free of charge to the LEAs who wish to have them, those larger LEAs. And of course, they would continue to reach out to districts. So the committee action, Member Belknap moved that the Law and Licensing Committee approve and continue R277-801, Draft 1 on first reading. That motion passed unanimously. Motion for the board, the Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve and continue R277-801, Draft 1 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the board is that the board approve and continue R277-801, Draft 1 on second and final reading. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Voting was unanimous.
Okay, R277-533, Educator Evaluation Systems. We had a really lengthy discussion, and feel free to read it. But basically, it came down to what were the requirements that we needed to report to satisfy ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and did that information have to come through Cactus? And it did not. And so the motion, hold on. Okay, committee action, Member Brittany Cummins moved that lines 164 and 165 be amended to strike the words through Cactus, and that motion passed unanimously. Committee action, Member Brittany Cummins moved that the committee direct staff to work with LEAs and charters to come up with a standard definition of highly effective, effective, emerging minimally effective, and not effective teaching standards, and bring the definitions back to the Law and Licensing Committee and see if those definitions can be incorporated into the into a guiding document. That motion passed unanimously. Committee action, Board Member Brittany Cummins moved that the Law and Licensing Committee approve the amendments to the continuation of R277-533 Draft 2 on first reading. The motion failed 2-3 with Belknap and Brittany Cummins in favor, and members Bolter, Lisa Cummins, and Warner opposed. Then Board Member Warner brought a motion to reconsider and moved that the Law and Licensing Committee approve amending lines 164 to 165 to strike through cactus and approve R277-533 Draft 2 as amended on first reading, which would make it Draft 3. That motion passed unanimously. So the motion for the board is that the Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve amendments R277-533 Draft 3 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the board is to approve amendments to R277-533 Draft 3 on second and final reading. Board Member Reeby.
So this concerns me greatly, and I went back and watched the video. A lot of interesting points were brought up, and I like that we're going to standardize the terminology, but we are not standardizing the tool. So if everybody's using a different tool, then we are not going to be able to use this data to determine who is successful or not, as Angie Stallings pointed out in the recording. The other question I have is, if we don't have our charter schools and our public neighborhood schools all using the same tool, and we're trying to use this information based on this conversation, it's not going to be useful information. My other question is, now that we've learned this morning again about how the lack of the vulnerability, I don't know, the way we were talking about some of our data and how we have to compartmentalize it, or I just don't feel it's comfortable using this tool in its current state to keep all this information on it. So it brings up a lot of questions about how we can do these things without putting people in harm's way, without being standardized. And so I really have a lot of concerns about this change of rules.
That's
Board Member
why.
Bolter.
Oh, sorry. That's why through cactus was struck out, and we, to satisfy the ESSA plans, we don't need aggregated data or disaggregated data. We just needed certain numbers, and that could staff. I believe Angie Stallings, and she could talk more to this, but they discussed with staff and discovered that we could collect it just fine without having to go through cactus. And the biggest concern was going through cactus because everything is stored on that cactus, and that was the big concern brought up by a lot of people, was the vulnerability of cactus.
Yes,
Angie,
thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Board Member Bolter, she described accurately what the general sense of what the discussion was. I think just a little more information. ESSA requires certain elements. It requires us to report equitable distribution of high-quality teachers across the state. One of the ways to report that is by collecting school-level data on teacher evaluation data. And at one point, actually, staff was looking to use that school-level educator evaluation data in order to satisfy the ESSA requirement. But we've moved. I'm sorry.
Not just alone.
Okay. And yeah, there are the certification out of field experience and the type of certification or license they have, right? I'm overgeneralizing, but at one point, yes, we wanted that data at the school level and the educator level to satisfy a reporting requirement. I think that we've now found another way to satisfy the ESSA reporting requirement, but to complement part of the discussion, there was an amendment made, which is included in draft 3, that any data that we collect is protected as a private record under GRAMA, which is something that wasn't included in the rule before. and with the hopes that school districts and charters who do choose to submit or upload their information into Cactus will feel confident that the state board and staff will not provide that data pursuant to a grandma request, for example. And so I think that hopefully that's helpful.
Board Member Lear?
I have a question that may lead me to something more specific, but my understanding, and it also goes to Michelle's summary of the actions by the committee. My understanding is the Educator Evaluation Act does not apply to charter schools. That's right or wrong?
Okay.
Then I don't understand, so if can I follow up with a couple of questions? I don't understand at the end of this rule, line 166, or line 169. How can we apply 169, the line on, how can we apply 533-6 paren 2 when the whole act doesn't apply to charter schools?
I believe for reporting purposes to ESSA, we have to, right?
Okay.
Well,
Angie?
that was at the time of the committee meeting, which was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Staff was looking at getting this data to fulfill that ESSA reporting requirement, which is why we needed the data from the charter schools. We do have a number of charter schools that currently provide us this data. Many of them even through Cactus. I think it's about 50% of our school districts and charter schools actually report educator evaluator data through Cactus currently. I guess the question, we can ask the charter schools to do this because it doesn't say in statute, although they're not subject to state law, they're not
subject to the
required under
Evaluation
Utah
Act.
code. We, in board rule, the board still has the authority to request this data. At the time the request was made, I think one of the justifications for it was that we were going to use it as part of our ESSA reporting. Again, that was what the discussion was at the time.
I have a couple of follow-up questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
So you're saying that 50% of the 120-plus charter schools use the Educator Evaluation Act?
I'm saying that about 50% of our LEAs, that would include school districts and charter schools, use Cactus to report educator
so it's-
evaluation data. I don't have the data in front of me. That's what I've
About
heard.
how many charter schools?
Right.
Because I think it's important that we be consistent. And my understanding is and I understand we're balancing what ESSA requires versus what the state law requires. But I think it is inexact and not accurate to say that the charter schools are using the same, are using the same language that the Educator Evaluation Act, when we know that that doesn't apply to them. I'd like to know how many of them actually use the Educator Evaluation Act, and then if they don't, do they use anywhere near the same language? Because I think we're not providing accurate information to either our state stakeholders or to the federal government. That troubles me.
Okay. Superintendent Dixon?
I think there's some mixing of terminology here. So the Human Resource Management Act is actually the section in code that they're exempt from. However, as you know, by virtue of being a charter, each charter has educator evaluation as part of their charter. I think that Director Sudworth could tell you that a large number of our charters do use our tool, our model tool that was developed in accordance with the Human Resource Management Act. And then those who choose to post that data in Cactus, that is a choice currently by LEAs. So a district or a charter could use Cactus as the repository for where they put that evaluation data. Not in totality, but a summative rating, because it's programmed, I don't know if it's a 0, 1, 2, I think it's programmed with terminology, effective, highly effective, et cetera. Is that correct, or numbers? So it's pre-programmed in it to be effective, and then if you want to change it, you just pull the drop-down menu. So some find it as a useful tool to house all of their data, because then they can pull reports from it.
And I'm still troubled that we don't know. I'd like to know how many charter schools use the evaluation tool.
Tool?
Right, because my experience is there's not one. And you're telling me there are some, but everybody's sounding a little fuzzy. So it
if I
would be
may.
nice
Okay,
to know.
Well, I
the-
think this is,
There's a tool and a law, though. So there's Human Resource Management Act.
Act.
They are exempt from
From,
that.
that's right.
Then there's a tool that staff has developed and had validated that some of our districts use and some of our charters use.
But we
It's
don't
a
know
tool
how
of
many.
choice. We do know how many districts, I'm looking at Diana, I'm sure Jeannie knows.
I don't care about districts, I just want to know how many charters.
I'm sure we can get that information for
That'd be
you.
helpful. And then I think this
Oh,
rule,
David knows.
this rule ought to reflect that. That's what my point is.
Reflect
Okay.
what?
Reflect if charters, how many, if there's 2 charters that use this, I don't think then,
This rule is
It
just
didn't say.
requiring them to turn in.
but if they don't do it, they don't have anything to turn in that's consistent with the tool.
I do.
Okay.
One more thing.
all right, Superintendent Dixon.
So the tool is apart from reporting.
Right.
So there's there's
Get
statute,
that.
there's a tool, and there's reporting.
Get that.
So the tool really is not, it's not, like, they can use their own,
Yes, they
any
do.
district could use
They
their
have
own
to.
tool. Just want to be clear, those are 3 separate things.
Right, but
Angie?
they, okay.
And I just wanted to clarify
I'm not
that
saying
state
it's-
law does require charter schools to report some evaluation data because of the educator salary adjustment program, that the state board distributes money to all LEAs, including charters, and they have to have had a satisfactory rating. So there is a reason why charter schools are currently reporting, because they do have to provide evaluation data or satisfactory ratings for charter schools also, but that's because of a compensation or a formula distribution.
Right, but we don't know, let me just make sure I understand you, Angie, because though they may have to report satisfactory, we don't know what tool they're using to say satisfactory.
I don't. Might-
Right. We don't even know what tools the districts are using either, though.
Okay.
They are not required to use the tool that we have, right?
Did you want to make?
So
Dave-
even districts are using different
Dave?
tools.
Yeah. Introduce yourself and,
David Smith, I'm with Educator Effectiveness, Educational Leadership Specialist. So we do know what tools the districts are using. All but 7 of our districts in the state use the model educator evaluation tool that was created by staff. The other districts are using, for example, Jordan School District uses their JPass tool. Granite School District has their own tool. I actually just did a survey with all of the districts about evaluation because we're in the process of monitoring school districts with their evaluation systems. So I have a list of all of the tools that the districts use, so we know that. We do not, however, collect data from the charter schools as to what tool they use. So we don't have any hard data on what tools they're using.
one more follow-up, Board Member Lear, and I'll let some others get it. You need to turn your light on. Oh, you did. There you go.
I think if we are saying that we're reporting data from charters, that we should know what tools they're using. You've obviously done a great job collecting that information from districts. I think that every charter school is supposed to have an evaluation component in its charter, and I think we should know that they do, because this affects the accuracy of our data, and that concerns me.
Okay.
If I may,
Yes, please.
we can certainly.
Oh, wait till it's red.
Oh.
Try it.
Okay.
Try it again.
There we go. So we can certainly collect that data if that's something the board would like us to do. We could do that very easily, just simply through a survey or email, something of that nature. You know, as you know, that return rates on surveys are not always that great, but we can certainly ask for that data, what tools they're using.
And if it's required, we can demand it, I guess.
Correct.
Okay. Board Member Reeby?
If everybody's using a different tool, how does this help us understand what's going on? I mean, the tool that I've been evaluated is very subjective. The JPass tool that I've seen is also subjective. for us to be collecting all this data and it's subjective from district to district and from teacher to teacher and from school to school, I struggle with that. And then I also, how can we hold our neighborhood schools to a certain standard and then not hold our charter schools to another standard? And how is this going to help us make decisions about our districts and our schools if we're not holding everyone to a similar standard? So if we're going to ask to report whether we're putting our schools, our resources in schools equally, and we're not having our charter schools reporting, how do we know that we're meeting the needs of those students as well? Because we don't demand anything from them. We only ask that they tell us whether they're satisfactory or not. So I think that leaves a big gap of students that are being left behind by not being held to the same standard. We want all of our kids to learn the same things. We want them all to succeed. And if we're not going to ask our students to move forward with the same tools, I don't think that's accurate for us at all.
And Angie, will you please state the changes in this? I think we're deflecting from what we're supposed to,
So
what was in the motion, and all of the whole evaluation. I mean, we're starting to get clear down into, well, outside of the same tool, but then it goes into what questions are at and who's the evaluator, competence of evaluate, and just see where this is kind of sliding off just a little bit.
yes,
But can you just go back to the changes here, please?
yes, I'd be happy to. I'm just going to pull up the.
While you're bringing
little
that up,
draft.
I'll turn, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins had a question or a comment.
Yeah, similar to what you just said, that the purpose of the changes in this rule were based on the motion we made a few months ago in reference to our ESSA plan, where we currently under state law, charter schools can use whatever evaluation system, and districts can as well. And so there's certain things that they're not required to do. And so this was meant to be a bridge. This rule, the changes in this rule is meant to be a bridge on that charter school where we were supposed to report those three things that superintendent, or four things, as far as equitable distribution of effective teachers. And so that's why we put in there, the motion earlier was for staff to work on creating those definitions. So it's a translation tool. So here's an evaluation tool that a school is using. Here's how to translate what you're doing into a defined language platform, so we all use the same effective, highly effective, or whatever those terms were. And so that's what the intent of these changes in the rule, from my understanding, were.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, Angie.
Essentially what Vice Chair Cummins just stated is correct, that when this rule was brought to law on licensing, it was drafted in order to obtain this data in order to comply with some reporting requirements for ESSA. And so while we were doing that, you can see here there's language in blue that was added after the first draft, which clarifies, and this was staff's interpretation already, is that these records are private records, but to explicitly put it into the rule that data reported, the educator evaluation data that's reported to us is classified as a private record under grandma. And then you can see the green, the through cactus. One of the original version of this rule also was asking charter schools and school districts to report this data through cactus, which immediately makes it or turns it into individual level data, educator level data. When you strike out the through cactus, now when they provide that data, it is not required to be reported at the individual level. It can be reported in the aggregate level. Although, as I stated before, some LEAs have chosen to report it through Cactus. So we do have some educator level data, and from other districts, we have it at the aggregate.
Okay.
There's nothing in here talking about how that data is going to be used or trying to provide for a comparison among LEAs or providing more compensation to one teacher over another. There's nothing about using that data to provide some sort of a benefit or penalty to teachers based on that data, which I think goes to maybe what Board Member Lira is saying about how do we know how comparable it is.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the motion. The motion that's before the board is the board approve amendments to R277-533, draft 3 on second and final reading. Board Member Reby?
So if we are not asking everyone to use a tool, how can this amendment tell us that we are distributing our teachers equally? And maybe this isn't part of the amendment, but how can we approve of amendment that doesn't even address the problem? We don't have any accurate information whether our charter schools are using effective teachers because they don't have to use a tool. So how can I make an amendment to a rule that says that I am using a tool to say that we have effective teachers equally distributed across the state if 10% of our state doesn't even have a tool? Like, I don't understand how this amendment doesn't address that. Like, I can't say that this is accurate because I don't have a tool. So I'm not really researching whether all my teachers are effective because they're not using a tool. So I don't know. So how do I make an amendment to something that's not happening? Like, that's my problem with this.
Okay. Chair Bolter, did you have something? There's still some other comment. Did you want to get other comment before you speak? Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
And I just wanted to make clear that this isn't charter versus district, that the tool is not required of any LEA, that there are most of our large districts do not use the State Board of Education tool. So just FYI.
Okay. Board Member Bolter?
I was just going to call to question.
Okay. Before I accept that, I'm going to allow Superintendent Dixon to.
I just want to clarify what we're actually reporting to ESSA. It's not evaluation data.
Right.
What we are reporting to ESSA is looking for patterns in distribution of teachers. So if they are, as Deputy Stallings stated earlier, if they are teaching out of field, meaning they're teaching in something they're not licensed for, or inexperienced or ineffective, you look at patterns. And then our responsibility would be to provide technical assistance and guidance to LEAs if we see inequitable distribution. And it's all about primarily looking at the teachers that are serving in our most highly impacted schools. So in some cities, they have found data that's very prevalent that in their most highly impacted schools, students who are most at risk for academic failure are served by inexperienced and teachers out of field who are, whether it's licensed or teaching in something they're not qualified for. And so the purpose of this whole reporting piece around Title IIA has shifted from one of effectiveness to one of are we equally or equitably distributing teachers? Do we have policies at the local level to help inform ensuring that each student is taught by a qualified or effective teacher? Okay, so it's really not about educator evaluation per se, even though it's in the evaluation rule. It's really about how do we, what kind of data do we gather and report back to the federal government? And they are not specific about you must do it this way. So each state is reporting in their own particular way, and we've made determination about what that looks like. But the evaluation rule 533 is comprehensive and has been around for a few years now, that has been driving our practice. So the amendments are really to do two things. One, for those who choose to put their data in Cactus, currently ensuring that that data has some privacy wrapped around it because it wasn't in there before. So that's a key piece of the amendment, is privacy for teachers.
Okay, we have a call to question. I allowed Superintendent to give clarity, which her light was actually on before I went to Chair Bolter. So that's an end debate. Takes a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. One no. Okay. Passes. Okay, we'll go to the motion. The motion is that the board approve amendments to R277-533 Draft 3 on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Will the ayes raise their hands? Okay, Board Member Wright, Cannon, Cummins, Belknap, Bolter, Ellis, Cummins, am I number 8? 7? And I'm an aye. Motion passes. Please continue.
Okay, data sharing agreement, external request for de-identified student level data. Chief Privacy Officer Whitney Phillips reviewed West State's request for de-identified student level data to conduct a study to increase the field's understanding of English learner status for English learners with disabilities to improve the technical assistance and guidance that the U.S. Department of Education can provide to states and districts. It was felt that the U.S. Department would use this data to create policies that we would then have to follow, and that we didn't really see much benefit to the state of Utah. So the committee action was that Board Member Brittany Cummins moved that the Law and Licensing Committee deny the West State Data Sharing Agreement. Motion passed unanimously. The motion for the board is that the Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board deny the West State Data Sharing Agreement.
Okay. The motion before the board is that the board deny the West State Data Sharing Agreement. Discussion. Board Member Hanson?
Thank you. When I looked at this, I was a little bit surprised because it looked like research that would be helpful to our state. One of the most difficult things is determining whether an ELL or an EL student has special needs or not, because there's a communication barrier. And so that's extremely difficult. So when I looked at this, I wondered about it. So I called Leah Voorhees, and she actually had not been aware of this, and she had some information on it. She's here. I don't know if you want to allow her to give information, or if we can allow Law and Licensing to reconsider it with Leah's information. But Leah is the expert on special education.
If you have a question and you would like to ask the question from staff, we have a motion on the table. And if you'd like to invite,
Sure,
I'll
if we
invite Leah up.
if we could invite Whitney Phillips and Leah Voorhees
Okay,
to
invite
answer. I have a couple
Whitney
of
and
questions.
Leah to answer questions from Board Member Hanson. Okay, we'll need to turn those.
So my question, I guess, to Leah is if she thinks that the information that she would gain from this study would be useful, because I think the committee probably didn't have all the information and didn't think that it was going to be useful. So I'm wondering how you feel about it, and I'm also kind of curious, and maybe Whitney can explain this, why Leah didn't know about it beforehand, and so she could give information to the committee.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, hang on one sec. Okay.
Hi, Whitney Phillips, Chief Privacy Officer here. And I spoke to Linda about this. Typically, external researchers fill out an application. WestStat filled out this application, and then it is reviewed by myself and by legal to see if it's permissive. There isn't a proactive reaching out by myself or others to determine if directors are interested in the proposed agreement. Typically, directors will already know about this research and actively seek that the researcher requested on their behalf. In this case, we didn't proactively reach out. Leah didn't know about it, but now since this time, it's been brought to her attention, and I think there is some interest.
Okay. Leah?
So it's red, okay. Assistant Superintendent Leah Voorhees. So, Board Member Hanson did ask me about whether or not I thought the technical assistance that would come from the Department of Education related to this particular research study would be useful. It would be very valuable. One of the most complicated parts of special education evaluation and eligibility is when a student is an English language learner, being able to determine if it's the language that is getting in the way of their learning, or if it's disability, or if it's a combination of both, and then how to intervene related to language acquisition and development, and then related to a disability. So technical assistance from the Department of Education would be hugely valuable to Utah and to all other states. We spend quite a bit of time and energy working on together related to that particular issue. I also spoke to Christelle Estrada, who's our English language learner Title III specialist, and had her review this request as well. She agrees with me the technical assistance would be very valuable. That is a different question than whether or not Utah should participate. We believe that even if Utah did not participate, the technical assistance that will come from the WestStat study will be valuable to Utah. So a different question is whether or not it's important for our students to be participants in the study. But we definitely think the technical assistance that will come from the study will be valuable to Utah.
Okay, did that answer your questions?
It did answer my questions. And then just a comment that I really appreciate these ladies. They've taken a lot of questions from me over the past couple of days. And then my comment is, I think if we're going to get the technical assistance from the research, that it would be good for us to participate and have the Utah part. It's not personal identifiable information, but I think it would be helpful for us to be able to participate in it so that our data would be involved as well.
Okay. Board Member Reeby?
Our English language learners are our most struggling students. When you look at the data, they are not succeeding. So I would agree with Board Member Hanson that it's important for us to use any research we can get to help these students achieve. They are drastically below every other group of people. So I agree. I think we should use this data.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
So when we talked about this in committee, we agreed that the value of the information would be fantastic. But some of the questions in the agreement that we talked about in committee were that we were approving releasing of student data, but then the contact would be between the LEA and the federal government. And so there was a little bit of discomfort as to who was approving the data and who would be making contact with the federal government, as well as, so it was just basically in the technicalities of the agreement. And then when they said the use of the data would be for federal policy, and there wasn't any indication that they were going to publish their work or create anything that would be useful for states. And so that was why we decided what we did. And so if you have some additional information on how our state would get access to the information if once this took place, and then as well as what the interaction, like, are we putting LEAs in a position that they may not want to participate, or are they going to be just directly working with the State Board of Education? So I guess if we could clarify those things, I agree that the information is valuable and very useful. So let me answer it.
I don't believe I can answer those questions because I didn't look into them, seeing as that it didn't pass the committee. But it seems like those answers could be readily answered if brought back at another time.
Okay. And I just had a quick question, and we have another board member that has a question, and this is more for our AAGs. It seems like this was more, there were some parts of that agreement that wasn't appealing. Was there any discussion, was any AAGs present or were you guys involved in any discussion of amending this agreement that was more favorable to the board's, or, I mean, not the board, the committee's request.
And I don't believe we were.
Here, let me turn that on, sorry.
It's all right. And I don't believe we were, although I'd be happy to, as Whitney suggested, take a look at that and bring that back right away if that's an option.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. Vice Chair Ellis?
Yes, as Whitney Phillips knows, I'm not completely comfortable with the security around de-identified data. And so I'd like to see what data points they're actually asking for. And this is such a big document. Okay, thank you. I didn't see that it was behind my head. I'm looking through this contract. And thank you. Is that somewhere I can look? So I have to turn them backwards. Which attachment?
I brought it up from the March Law and Licensing Committee.
Okay, I'll go
board
back and
docs.
look there. Thank you.
Board Member Reby?
So when they talk about exiting the program, are they talking about exiting the WEDA testing and exiting?
Yeah, it would not necessarily be exiting special education. What they're
No.
talking about is exiting English language development services.
Board Member Hanson?
So I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to send this back to law and licensing and have them work with the AAGs and with Whitney and Leah and see if we could get answers to some of our questions before we vote on it. And so we already have a committee motion on the floor, so I don't know how I would go about that. Do we need to vote on that motion before we have another motion to send it back to law and licensing?
Well, if the chair
I don't think we
wants
can
to
withdraw.
withdraw. Can't think.
You could do a motion to postpone indefinitely, and then it could just be assigned to.
I thought she could withdraw.
Motion to postpone.
Okay. A motion to postpone basically we'd put it back into,
Okay, I move to postpone.
we have a second. Well, there's not really any discussion on the postpone, so we'll vote on it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Next is the Utah Department of Health Office of the Medical Examiner Data Sharing Agreement. This is for student-level data, and with the passage of HB 370, the suicide prevention and medical examiner provisions, we have to give our data over for the purpose of a research project done by Michael Staley, which is the, I forgot what he is. Medical examiner, and it's the suicide prevention research. And so the committee action was Board Member Brittany Cummins moved that the committee approve the Utah Department of Health Data Sharing Agreement, removing Whitney Phillips from the contract as the official signer on behalf of the Utah State Board. Motion passed 3-2 with members Belknap and Brittany Cummins and Warner in favor, and Bolter and Lisa Cummins opposed. Motion for the board. The Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve the Utah Department of Health Data Sharing Agreement, removing Whitney Phillips from the contract as the official signer on behalf of the State Board of Education.
Okay, the motion before the board is that the board approve the Utah Department of Health Data Sharing Agreement, removing Whitney Phillips from the contract as the official signer on behalf of the State Board of Education. I am not seeing any discussion, so we'll vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Will the ayes? We have over, okay. We have Board Member Cannon, Board Member Warner, Board Member Hanson, Board Member Belknap, Board Member Nilsson, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Lear, Board Member Reby, Board Member Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. Always want to get that right. So the motion passes. Okay. Okay, hang on. Superintendent, what did you have?
Yeah, just want to acknowledge Dr. Staley in the audience and correct his title, which is the coordinator for Suicide Prevention Research Coordinator. I hate for him to go away thinking he now has a new job as medical examiner. So.
Okay. Chair Bolter.
Okay, so R277-501, the educator licensing. We had a meeting last night, and took action, so I will read out actually our new action stuff. And it's down, if you look on board docs, it's 10.1. So
Can
that
you-
way it's available for
Can we get
everyone.
staff to put it up just in case?
And I think staff is that being brought up just in case? Okay.